and foremost, our subscribers. Without you, we just wouldn't be able to do the kind of journalism that we work at every day. I'd also like to thank the school superintendents. They've agreed to join us today. These are the folks making the hard decisions that really affect all of us. And whether you're a student, a teacher, or a parent, you know that the coronavirus has really been the most important issue we've dealt with lately in education, and information about it changes all the time. So these are the folks who can answer your questions, and we're going to get to a lot of them. Now I'd like to introduce Maureen Downey, our education columnist. She'll lead this discussion, and I'll join you a little bit later for a chat with our journalists who cover education throughout Metro Atlanta.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to our 7 Metro superintendents for joining us today. I'd like to introduce them in alphabetical order. They are Dr. Maureen Beasley, Clayton County Public Schools, Dr. Mary Elizabeth Davis, Henry County Schools, Dr. Lisa Herring, Atlanta Public Schools, Dr. Mike Looney, Fulton County School System, Chris Ragsdale, Cobb County School District, Cheryl Watson Harris, DeKalb County School District, J. Alvin Wilbanks, Gwinnett County Public Schools. A year ago today, matter of fact, Fulton County became the first system in Georgia to close its schools in response to the coronavirus. It was the first in a long line of dominoes to fall. It's been a challenging year for Georgia schools, teachers, parents, and students. In preparing today's questions for our guest superintendents, we asked AJC readers to share some of their concerns about the challenges. We also received suggestions from our AJC education reporters, who will be here after this panel with editor Kevin Riley to discuss what they heard and take more reader questions. Our questions reflect months of coverage by the AJC's education reporters who were there when schools closed a year ago and are still there today as schools reopen and navigate what has become our new normal. That brings us to our first question, which every superintendent will have a chance to answer. We are going to start alphabetically, and that is going to be Dr. Beasley of Clayton County, which is actually a great starting point because Clayton plans to bring its students back for the first time on April 12th, beginning with elementary school. So Dr. Beasley, to set us off, you all waited a long time to reopen. How can you ensure students, teachers, and staff will be safe returning to your classrooms?
Thank you for the question. You asked how can we ensure that our students and teachers, employees are safe. I can just tell you, as I'm sure all the other superintendents are doing, we're ensuring that we, of course, follow the science. We're ensuring that we provide environments in which students and teachers and others have access to masks, they have access to hand sanitizer opportunities to clean desk, etc. We have provided our employees with the opportunity to be vaccinated. We're hopeful that as many as possible will take advantage of the vaccination opportunity. We're going to do our best, of course, to ensure that students are safe as they ride buses. Clean those buses as often as necessary. We're going to continue to monitor the data, and we'll, again, just do our best to minimize the risk. We realize that we cannot eliminate the risk of exposure, but we can do our best, again, to minimize the risk of exposure to the virus. And that's our commitment. Our community understands that there is a certain amount of risk. However, they do expect us to minimize that risk as much as possible. And we believe we're doing just that with the actions that I've shared.
Thank you, Dr. Beasley. We're going to now go to Dr. Davis in alphabetical order. I want to tweak this question slightly because the districts that will be speaking now, most of them have been open for a little while. Some just opened. So my question is slightly different to those districts. You are open. Things seem to be going well, yet I still sense a lot of teacher fear. My Facebook Messenger and my email is full of teacher lament and concerns about what they think is a disregard for their safety, there's also parents who are still concerned. So with that in mind, I would move this question to Dr. Davis of Henry County Schools.
To the AJC for the opportunity to really tell our stories about operating schools and keeping learning going during a worldwide pandemic. What I'll start by saying is that we do know more today than we did 359 days ago. And what we know is that schools have not proven to be the mass spreading spaces that we had once feared they could be. When following adequate and effective COVID-19 mitigation strategies, monitoring for those strategies, there can be a very safe and responsible school setting for learning to happen on campus while you continue to offer a remote option to families. But there's no doubt that operating schools in this season has also been layered with heaviness, with a gravity, and I've likened it to really a blanket of snow. When you look outside, there's just a lot of grief, and it's like you look at everywhere you look and there's grief. And so there is a certain reality for any professional in public education that we're doing our work with the heartache and heartbreak. But I believe our educators have been resilient, and they have actually seen such effective on-campus experiences for themselves that their confidence is evolving. And like Dr. Beasley, Henry County Schools is participating in vaccination, and our employees are having access to that vaccination, and we're thankful that their work has really been elevated to importance in our infrastructure in our state. So I certainly acknowledge our teachers' fears, but I also really applaud that they have risen above those fears to do the work that has been called upon us to do in a season that none of us would have planned out quite like this.
Now, Dr. Herring from Atlanta Public Schools on that same question.
Hi, thank you, Maureen, for the question. You know, we've had several weeks now where we've had the opportunity to not only open up the brick and mortar option for our students and families, but to also help reassure them that we've done all that we can to help mitigate for safety and health risks. And that's been a key factor. That's what we'll continue to do in an effort to emphasize reassurance. Like my colleagues across the metro area, we've been very specifically strategic about our mitigation practices, whether that has been the provisions of PPE, the practices tied to disinfecting our buildings and our buses, and also for social distancing. Also in Atlanta Public Schools, we added another layer, which was tied to surveillance testing that we continue to do weekly. We believe that that provided another layer of safety, but it also helped with the ability to know on a weekly basis within a matter of hours or minutes once the surveillance testing for COVID-19 has been done, whether or not they're individuals who are symptomatic or asymptomatic. That helps with the psychological well-being to know that and to be able to prepare and respond for that. But I also say this, and I think we're all going to say this, it is without question that in an effort to address your lift of teacher fear, we've all been cognizant of that. None of us have ever closed our eyes or turned our heads to that. Our teachers have been heroes, and we could not and we cannot do this without them. The difficult decisions that we've had to make have always been grounded in not only protecting our students, but our teachers. And what we do now is to continue to stay focused on that. For us in Atlanta Public Schools, we're also thinking about their well-being as well as the students' well-being, because the truth of the matter is a global pandemic has played a role on our social and emotional wellness. And we'd like to continue to stay focused on that to support all of us who've been traumatized.
Thank you. And now we go to Dr. Looney, Fulton County Schools with the same question.
Thank you, Maureen, for your question. I too think it's important to acknowledge the angst and fear that so many of our employees and students and families have been feeling over the course of the last year. Fulton County Schools has worked very closely with the Fulton County Board of Health to make sure that all of the processes and practices that we have implemented are based on scientific evidence and the best medical advice that we can receive. We've learned a lot by doing. Fulton County Schools slowly but surely turned face-to-face instruction back on as an option for our parents. And as time has progressed, more and more of our families have opted to have their students return to face-to-face. We've been proactive in our mitigation strategies and proactive when small outbreaks occur in a specific school community by quickly pivoting those schools and communities into universal remote learning. In addition to that, we're doing the same things that the rest of our school district colleagues are doing, and that is communicating with their parents, advocating for vaccinations, establishing a vaccination process for employees, and trying to find the balance between meeting the needs of our students and families with the fears and anxieties of all of our employees. It's been a difficult balancing act, but I think that we have found a balance in Fulton County Schools to both meet the needs of our students and address the fears of our employees.
Thank you. And now we turn to Superintendent Ragsdale, Cobb County School District. Same question.
So, who would have thought a year ago that we would have closed school on Friday, March 13th for the remainder of the academic year? Nobody could have seen that coming. We were just then getting our feet wet, so to speak, with the virus. This was brand new to us. And nobody would have thought we were going to make a decision to close school for the rest of the academic year, 2.5 months. So it goes without saying that nobody was prepared as superintendents, as teachers, as bus drivers, as any position on our team to be prepared for what was coming, because we just didn't know what was coming. So that being said, we have responded. We've actually provided over 800,000 pieces of PPE. Just as many have also expressed, we're in the middle of a vaccination rollout. It's quite challenging when you're the largest employer in the county to be able to say, okay, we're going to vaccinate all of our employees. We're preparing for 8,000 to 10,000 vaccinations to take place. That is a huge lift. And I can't say enough about the partnership that we have enjoyed with our Cobb Douglas local board of health. We have become daily conversations, sometimes multiple conversations on a daily basis to make sure, just as many have also expressed, that we're following the DPH guidance. When this first started, nobody knew what was happening. As the summer progressed and numbers started spiking, we were literally faced with, what are we going to do about opening school? And once we in Cobb came to the conclusion that we just weren't comfortable opening face-to-face on August the 3rd. We had to move that out, and ultimately it became October when we started the phased in face-to-face. But I am extremely proud of every team member that we have, because they have certainly gone above and beyond on a daily basis, especially our teachers. There's no class that we took to be superintendents that prepared us for this pandemic. And certainly teachers didn't sign up to teach in a worldwide pandemic, but we're in the middle of one. And in education, I think resiliency is the proper term to define what all of our team members have brought to the plate, because again, over and above can be a descriptor for each and every team member that we have. Safety is our utmost concern and our top priority for all of our staff and students. And we want to make sure that parents feel comfortable sending their students back to face-to-face environment in classrooms. And we have been in that since October. As we look to next year, certainly questions abound. As the vaccination becomes more available, that's going to ease that situation, obviously. But at the same time, nobody, I think, is under the impression that we're going to flip a switch and we're going to be back to normal. Some things are going to go back to normal at some point in time. Some things may never go back to the way that they were done prior to the pandemic. So that being said, I think, we were very fortunate In Cobb, to be in the position we were already moving toward having an online presence for a virtual option. But, you know, we would have never rolled it out in the manner that we were forced to roll it out in last year. But that being said, I think that we have learned from mistakes, obviously, that were made and things that we could do better. And that's always a focus, is how we do get better. Because at the end of the day, we exist to provide a top shelf education for all of those students and families that have come to expect that. So as we move forward, I think that, you know, it's still a learning experience. And fortunately, it's on the job training. And we will continue to learn and we will continue to listen. And we will have to continue to lead to get us through this pandemic so that we can get back to some sense of normalcy, hopefully next school year. But obviously, there's still a lot of question marks where that is concerned.
Thank you. And now we move to Superintendent Watson Harris, DeKalb County Schools. Same question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maureen. And it's great to be in community again with all of my colleagues in the Metro Atlanta area. When I think back to the last time we were all together speaking about the same subject, I had recently arrived from New York City, where the numbers were surging and the numbers were lower here. And we were about to kind of enter that same space. And it's just been amazing to see how each district has navigated in the best interest of their community. I will say in DeKalb, I've just been very really fortunate to work so closely with the DeKalb Board of Health as a true partner, really lockstep in all of our decision making, as well as the members of our medical advisory committee that stepped up very early on to help us make sense of this pandemic. But our mantra from the beginning was to go slow, to go fast, to rely on the guidance from the CDC. And as that guidance evolved, so did our decision-making processes and where we were. So in terms of the fear amongst staff, not just our teachers, we know that that fear exists on every level of the organization, and all of our staff members who are on the front lines, exposing themselves and their families to this horrific virus. Our intention has been to wait until we were ready. That the safety of our students and staff was our #1 priority. And as we felt comfortable with slowly bringing our teachers back in January, we listened to teachers who were still not ready and who were afraid, and really examined what was happening in our environment, and offered a hardship waiver that, you know, whoever was happy and ready to return, they could return to the buildings, and that there would be no shame for those that just were not ready, that we would give them additional time and support to prepare themselves, both in terms of their personal commitments as well as just their overall well-being. And we were thrilled to be able to welcome them back, all of our staff, on February 3rd. It was a remarkable day having staff come back. I can't say enough about our principals who met every teacher exactly where they were, and made a safe and nurturing welcome back to the building. But yesterday we welcomed back our first wave of students. We welcomed back our pre-K to 2nd grade students in elementary, our 6th grade students in middle school, and our 9th grade students, of which one is my son, in our high schools. And it was just the most beautiful day. And I think that while we are focused on our testing plan, we have both internal and external testing sites, while we're working with our amazing partners who are offering the vaccine in multiple locations throughout DeKalb, as well as working on our Super Saturday, where we will have a mass vaccination in collaboration with the DeKalb Board of Health. We recognize that getting our students back in the building and being reminded of the the reason why we do this work, it's really for the children. And that while our staff have maybe experienced some anxieties and fears about returning, what I saw yesterday and what I heard from our teachers is that they recognize the importance of them being in the building and meeting the needs of our scholars. And if we've learned anything from this pandemic, it's really the true importance of our humanity and our interconnectedness, and what it's taught us about stepping up in the face of fear. But we will continue to work and respond to this pandemic as a family, as a community, and to make sure that we're keeping everyone safe and joyful in this wonderful profession we have the honor to serve. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we move to Superintendent Wilbanks, Gwinnett County Public Schools. Same question.
Morning, Maureen.
Good morning.
We have done a lot of things that our Metro District colleagues have done. We really, on March the 13th was the last day of last school year that we were in session. And quite frankly, we thought we would be out for a very short period of time, and we wasn't too concerned about that. But as things got worse, we realized this was sort of for the long haul. And the 9 weeks of last year taught us a lot. It taught us, first of all, that digital learning that we'd been used to providing, which we thought was very effective, is not necessarily effective for the long haul for all students. And we try to look at what do our students need. And one of the conclusions that I think we made early on was that where possible, students need to be in school. Obviously, we were not able to bring students back in school the last 9 weeks, but we delayed the start of this school year. We were originally scheduled to start on August 5th. We moved that to August 12th. And then from there, we did a phase-in. We brought the elementary special ed students back along with first and second grades first. And we had a phase in, and by September, by September the 12th, I think we had all of our students back in school that chose to come back. Number one, we gave them a choice. They could either do digital or they could have in-school instructions. And we had about 55% of our students chose to come back for in-school instructions. We had about 45% that chose digital, and that's still pretty much the division that it is now, 55% in school, 45% digital. Some of the things that we did, like everyone else, we certainly concerned with our people coming back into buildings, and we've done everything that is humanly possible to make our buildings as safe as possible. Our principals did a tremendous job laying out hallways, classrooms. And one of the things that helped us with social distancing, obviously all of our students were not in school and are not now, so we're able to social distance more than we would be if we had full capacity of our students in school. The other thing that we've learned, we learned, first of all, that our teachers and staff are outstanding, and their commitment to students is unparalleled. We believe students need to be in school when we can safely do that. While digital instruction is a great option, there is no replacement for in-school education and student-teacher interactions, and we're doing everything we can to try to make sure that as many students as possible can get back in school, and we can do that safely. Our buildings are set up. Our principals have teams of teachers that really deal with this. We do follow the appropriate protocols. If someone is suspected or has the virus, then all the protocols kick in place, and we're prepared to handle that. if you look at the community spread versus the spread of the virus that's in our district, it's the place you want to be. Students are safer in school. Adults are safer in school than they are out of school. And we've seen this from the time like the winter break, as well as anytime there's a break, we see the uptick in our staff simply because of their interaction with other people and failing to do some of the things they probably do when they're in school. We will do this for this next school year. We plan to open both providing digital as well as in-school instructions with the same protocols, such as wearing a mask, social distance, wash your hands when possible, and always remember that you don't get in groups. You do that even when you're changing classes, or if your teachers are doing planning together, get in a big room where you can separate yourself. We're hoping for things to continue to get better as we move forward.
Now we are going to go in opposite order, and we're going to start again with Superintendent Wilbanks. And you actually touched on this. In this question round, I'm asking all of you to give a very brief answer, a minute or less. And simply the question is, the likely scenario is that many of your teachers are going to be vaccinated by the start of next year, but your students will not. So please tell the parents and the families in your districts what COVID protocols they can expect when school starts up, hopefully in August of this year. And again, we'll start with Superintendent Wilbanks, and we will go in reverse order. You have the floor, sir.
We will continue to provide the protocols that we've been providing this year, next year. We know that we're going to give an option for students to be virtual or in school. And those that come to school, the parents can be assured that the facilities will be safe as they can be. And we continue to encourage all of our people and require that they follow the appropriate protocols of mask, washing their hands, social distancing.
Now that question goes to Superintendent Watson Harris of DeKalb County.
Thank you so much for the question, Maureen. And I think that my colleagues would agree that there's still probably a lot that we will learn over the next couple of months as we have our staff receive the vaccine. But most certainly, we will maintain our ability to implement the mitigation strategies as outlined by the CDC. For our families, if they would like more information on those specifically in terms of our hand sanitizer stations, our PPE, our signage, the structures and systems we've put in place to assure social distancing, et cetera. We've created a number of day in the life videos, both for the district as well as individual school sites. So we encourage families to continue to view those videos if they would like to see it in action. And we continue, one thing we've learned from this is the importance of communication and over communication. So we continue to host town halls with our students, our families, and our community leaders. And we'll continue to update in real time our mitigation strategies, as well as our plans for both the summer as well as moving into the fall. Thank you.
Now we move to Superintendent Ragsdale. Quickly, what will school look like for Cobb County families when they return in the fall in terms of COVID protocols?
Thank you, Maureen. We've already announced that we will definitely be offering both a virtual option as well as face-to-face for next school year. We're actually doing a presentation at next week's board meeting on some of the details surrounding that virtual option and the face-to-face option. One thing that we went into the design process of the virtual option is to help to relieve teachers from being so overwhelmed and having the plate overflowing, so to speak, of having virtual and face-to-face students both in their classroom. So that was one of our main goals in designing next year's virtual option, is to help to remedy that for teachers. Because again, as I mentioned in the first statement, our teachers have gone above and beyond in making sure that we're providing that great education for all of our students and families, whether it be virtual or face-to-face. While we definitely think that we were positioned very well to have both virtual and face-to-face students receiving the same teaching, the same curriculum at the same time, it is taxing on teachers. And I think, one of the things that I'll throw out as well right now is, a lot of people have been concerned about teachers, especially leaving education, because again, nobody signed up to teach in a worldwide pandemic. But good news for us anyway, and I'm sure others are seeing the same thing, is we have sent out contracts. This time last year, we had 98.1% contracts already received back. This year, we've got 97.7%. So while it is a tick below where we were last year, it is by no means seeing teachers leaving education, which is so encouraging because, again, as Mr. Wilbanks said, there's nothing better than having students learning face-to-face in a classroom with our great teachers. And I just can't say enough about our teachers. They have gone above and beyond, again, each and every day. Getting back to what school is going to look like next year, again, the virtual option will be there. We will absolutely have the same protocols in place as far as cleaning and hand sanitizing and all of the social distancing kind of things, because, again, we're seeing the quarantine guidance changing, seems like, on a daily basis, because as the vaccination becomes more widespread and there's a larger percentage of the population becoming vaccinated, that quarantine is so vitally important. That's the one thing that I know many of us were talking with our boards of health on about, okay, once the vaccination is in place, we desperately need the quarantining protocols to be addressed, because if you've been vaccinated, but yet the quarantine is the same protocol, we're going to be in the same situation that we are right now, which is having to close classes, schools, etc., because you just don't have the numbers there to have school. So I am extremely pleased and encouraged to see those quarantine protocols being addressed, because as we move closer to summer and then closer to the start of school next year, we will absolutely be following the DPH guidelines, again, as we always have and continue to do. But that being said, we can expect, and I would ask that our parents come to expect, that guidance is going to be changing sometimes on a daily basis. It's very dynamic at this point in time. So while we're desperately encouraged, definitely encouraged that we're seeing more acceptance of the vaccination and also more widespread vaccinating techniques being used, we are very encouraged for looking into next school year. But again, I would say for everyone in Cobb, tune into next week's board meeting, because we will be doing a pre-entailed and detailed explanation and presentation on what that virtual option is going to look like next year.
Thank you. Now we move to Dr. Looney, Fulton County Schools. Same question.
Thank you, Maureen. Well, I will say, first of all, I do think the vaccinations are a game changer. As the science has proven, most of the risk associated with COVID falls on adults. And as more and more adults get vaccinated, the risk and the potential for extended school closures diminishes. August is a lifetime away in the world of COVID. And so I'm not prepared to make a statement today about what exactly fall looks like. I do know that our current plan is to offer full-time face-to-face instruction for all of our students, with the exception of those families that have decided that virtual learning is their path forward as a result of this experience. And so we have been in the process of standing up our first virtual school for students in grades 3 through 11. We have 1,300 students registered for that. Independent of COVID, they will be moving to a virtual learning platform. The balance of our students, we are hopeful and expect that they will return to our schools and be exposed to traditional instruction with their teachers. And so, we will continue to evaluate and modify our plans based on CDC guidance. And as the science evolves, so will we.
Thank you. Now we move to Dr. Herring, Atlanta Public Schools. Same question, please.
Yes, thank you, Maureen, for the question. In Atlanta Public Schools, as we think about COVID preparedness for fall 2021 into 2022, I agree with the cautiousness of acknowledging that that's quite some time away from now. What we have and will continue to do is to adhere to the best practices as we've been informed of them by CDC, the Department of Public Health, and other health experts who've been a part of a critical advisory task force with us. That advisement has been mission critical for pushing into what we believe are some of our wisest and most most effective protocols. I would anticipate that we would continue to wear masks, that we would continue to social distance and disinfect accordingly. As it relates to our instructional learning model, we are poised to entertain both face-to-face as well as virtual options as deemed appropriate. I think for many of us, we already had a virtual option in our own Atlanta Virtual Academy, but to the extent to which we would look at site-based virtual learning options, we will continue to review that. Most importantly, given that we're sitting in March and we're projecting for August, we will monitor the guidance that's been given to us, and we will adjust accordingly to maintain our commitment for safety and health risks for all that we serve.
Thank you. Now we turn to Superintendent Davis, Henry County Schools. Same question.
Well, thank you. So Henry County Schools is scheduled to open on time for in-person learning as we start the 21 school year, and also giving our families a choice for continuing their virtual experience. Some students have had more success academically in a virtual environment. So what was once a small virtual school for Henry County Schools is now being expanded for 3 pathways within the virtual academy. One pathway will be fully virtual, where you do not need to be on campus at any time. Another pathway in that virtual school will be a blended model, where you spend 2 days on a campus and then the remainder of your academic time virtually. And then the third pathway, we will continue our K-5 evening academy for families who have benefited from an alternative set of hours. And so our virtual school will be K-12. It'll have 3 different paths for all families. And we've already had more than 6,000 families opt for the virtual school next year. And so we really anticipate our on-campus and more traditional school setting is going to be not requiring our teachers to bridge both delivery models. And it's really provided a great option for our kids, but it's also a great option for our teachers. There are many teachers who have actually thrived and increased their effectiveness in a virtual environment, and they now see that their preferred instructional space is going to be to transition to our virtual academy. So I'm excited about the option there too. As far as school campuses, we will continue to align with the mitigation techniques that are recommended by DPH. And of course, as we've all acknowledged, it's a little too soon to know what they will be, but we'll be monitoring closely.
Thank you. And our final superintendent on that question, Dr. Beasley, Clayton County Schools.
Thank you, Maureen. I'll share that August, of course, we're looking at face-to-face. We're very hopeful. However, we will have some virtual teams at the various schools that parents will be able to take full advantage of. Relative to our safety measures and protocols, our parents have already received and will continue to receive our videos that basically demonstrate the protocols that we have in place for getting on school buses, arriving at school, breakfast, lunch, etc. We'll continue with our social distancing to the extent that it's required or that the guidelines say that they should occur. We'll continue to provide, of course, masks and hand sanitizers for those who need. We have invested in desk shields and other resources as necessary. We'll continue to ensure that our ventilation is appropriate to, of course, clean the air out as much as possible. Our students will, of course, be able to take full advantage of opportunities to engage virtually. If they need to move from face-to-face to virtual and vice versa, our staff will continue, we hope, to be vaccinated. As if we can get to 100%, that's great. But if not, as close to 100% as possible. But we'll just do our due diligence to monitor the data, quarantine as necessary, following the guidance of our Board of Health, not trying to create disruptive school situations, but also maximizing safety. So I will say that every day, I'm sure we'll be making decisions as every other school district, but our goal is to ensure kids are learning in a very safe environment. Teachers are safe, employees are safe, and we'll deal with the day-to-day issues as we always have done in K-12 education. And we'll get through it, and we'll have another school year as we are having this school year.
Thank you. Now we are starting a new question, and the question will go to Superintendent Davis of Henry County to start with, and we'll go that way. And that question, which I would like folks to answer very, very quickly for the sake of time: do you believe all students and teachers should be required to be vaccinated to be at school? And that would mean teacher vaccinations, which are now, I believe, voluntary, would be made mandatory, and COVID vaccinations would be part of a school requirement. Dr. Davis, can you start us off on that, Henry County?
Sure. Although I look forward to my vaccine just in a couple short days here, I do respect that it's a personal choice and a health choice for individuals and their families. And I'd really encourage self-education. And we've got a lot of great resources on the Henry County Schools Vaccination Toolkit, where you can really see some testimonials and some great resources to make some personal decisions for yourself and your family.
Moving to Dr. Herring of APS, your thoughts, please, on this?
So I believe that we need to take serious consideration into that possibility. I understand that there are personal and cultural health reasons around individuals who do not choose to vaccinate. But as we've also participated in vaccinations throughout our country over the years as it relates to specific health issues, I think that the pandemic has warranted valid consideration for that. Do I believe it's critical? As we go into a voluntary moment, I do believe it's critical. I will be getting vaccinated as well, and will continue to advocate for that in the Atlanta Public Schools community, and particularly in our communities where we find that there are individuals who are less interested in participating for cultural reasons, specifically even in our Black and Brown communities, where we see low numbers of participation.
Thank you. Dr. Looney?
Well, I'm not a medical professional, but I will say on a personal level, the answer is no.
Okay, thank you. And now we move to Superintendent Ragsdale, Cobb County.
Thank you, Maureen. Yeah, in a short answer, it's a personal choice for all of our employees. I actually communicated that in an email that there would be no requirement for any of our employees to get vaccinated. I do believe it's important because the vaccination is what's going to allow us to move forward. However, for students, that's out of our hands. That's not above our pay grade. So the state can certainly require that vaccination as part of the laundry list of vaccinations required to attend school. But that's at their level and their call. But as far as employees and it being related to employment for the Cobb County School District, that is absolutely a personal choice.
Thank you. Now we move to Superintendent Watson Harris to Cobb County Schools on that question.
Thank you so much. For me, I will be getting the vaccine, but I do appreciate that this is a personal choice. I believe the role of the school department here, as with all things, is making sure that we're helping our families and our staff make informed decisions. So we will be working with our family impact hubs, as well as our staff affinity groups, to make sure that they receive all of the information that they need so that they can make the choice that is best for themselves and for their families.
And now, Superintendent Wilbanks, Gwinnett County Schools.
We certainly will continue to encourage all of our staff, teachers, and other school staff to take the vaccination. We're trying to really encourage them. Our health department has really been very cooperative, and they set up mass vaccination sites yesterday. I think we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 teachers that received it. Friday is another big day that's set up for that. It won't be required, but we are looking at numbers, and I think that would be something that would help us move through this pandemic at this stage.
And finally, on that question, Dr. Beasley, Clayton County Schools.
Thank you, Maureen. We will not support mandating the vaccine right now. However, I do believe that a conversation should be held as to what's in the best interest of the public safety. But right now, I'll take the vaccine. I'm encouraging as many employees as possible to study the vaccines and take whichever vaccine they feel the most comfortable with. We believe that that's part of our strategy to create a safe environment for our students and employees. However, I do again believe that there should be a larger conversation about the need to mandate vaccines, as other vaccines have been mandated throughout the history of this country. And at the appropriate time, we should have a conversation about this virus and the vaccination related to it as well. Thank you.
Now we have a new question for our panel, and we're going to start with Dr. Herring of Atlanta Public Schools. All of you have acknowledged that virtual seems to have a future with your districts. There will be a place for it. The evidence on virtual, though, remains mixed, with some suggestion it doesn't work very well for many students. So you have families signing up for it, but how comfortable are you with that and reassuring them that it will work for their child? Again, we're going to start with Atlanta Public Schools.
So thank you for that question. I think there is a twofold dynamic to entertain when responding to this. Number one, last year, this time in March, those of us across the country, and of course here in the metro area, that found ourselves transitioning to virtual were forced to do so. We were discombobulated. The level of preparedness for virtual learning, if it were not already in place, because there has been research and practices tied to virtual learning and one-to-one personalized learning, for districts that had that in place, that pivot was perhaps easier. But for those of us for whom this was just not a familiar territory, we found ourselves building the plane as we were flying it, and also addressing other issues tied to fear and learning. So as we think about the future, we've learned a lot. We've heard that shared already. Number one, that there are students and educators who thrive in a virtual learning environment. We've not had as much time, given a 12-month pandemic or interruption due to a pandemic, to prepare in the ways that perhaps if we were already doing it, we could have tiered that up, or if we were entertaining it, we would have been more thoughtful about how that rollout might look. We didn't have time for a rollout, if you will. We just had to prepare. I would welcome the opportunity for us to continue to reimagine what it looks like to acknowledge where technology and teaching and learning integrate, because that is an opportunity for us to seize how to tier up rigor and learning and instruction for the future and engagement for our students. I think it also must be said that does not suggest that there isn't a place for physical engagement. Part of what the schoolhouse provides is that shaping and forming for social and emotional awareness and behaviors and practices, and of course interventions. But I would not be fair to my own professional belief around this work if I didn't acknowledge that the opportunity for us to focus more on teacher development, professional growth, and student growth around technology integration in the classroom, I think that should be on the forefront of our thoughts. If we've learned nothing, we've learned that we could do it, even if we weren't thinking about doing it. We in Atlanta Public Schools want to do more than just think about what we've gone through. We want to be prepared for not only when it happens again, but to think about reimagining that integration, not because of a pandemic, but because it's part of, I believe, best practices. So I see a future in that for our teachers, for our scholars and our families. Of course, that's tied to resourcing and professional growth, and never forgetting that part of that whole school experience is also the interaction that we can have with our staff and with our people, so our students as well.
Thank you. And now that question goes to Dr. Looney, Fulton County Schools.
Thank you. I do have some concerns short term about the efficacy of teaching 100% virtually. We have some students and teachers that obviously have done very well, but on the whole, the data indicates that it's not as effective as traditional face-to-face instruction. I think one of the positive results of COVID, if there are any, is that we've been forced to rethink the role of technology in schools altogether. We have for decades now looked at technology as an accessory to what's happening in the classroom rather than as a absolutely needed tool, as an integral part of the instructional practices that we're engaged in. So whether students opt for 100% virtual moving forward or a blended version or face-to-face, I can assure you in Fulton County schools, we are ramping up our expectations and our service delivery model for students and families using the tools that we've been forced to start using significantly in our school district. I think that's a positive development. I think long-term, the efficacy of virtual instruction will improve. But in the short term, there is this hurdle that we have a steep learning curve to climb to make sure that the quality of instruction, the engagement, the rigor, and the assessment practices in a virtual environment mirror that of a face-to-face model.
Thank you. Now we move to Superintendent Ragsdale, Cobb County Schools.
Thank you, Maureen. So I'm going to echo what many of my colleagues have already said. I believe, though, that we were a little bit further down the path with our Cobb Teaching and Learning System, or CTLS, as we refer to it as. But we were not at the point to flip a switch and go immediately to 100% online learning. But what this has done is show not only the need for that aspect of teaching and learning, because as many have already said, there are many teachers and many students who are thriving in that environment. On the flip side, there are many students that are just simply not wired to be an online student. They need that face-to-face, regardless at what age level. So moving forward, I think absolutely that virtual learning will have a place and serve in a lot of districts as that very integral piece of the classroom technology. We've seen the benefits of the technology that we have already had installed in Cobb and how it has benefited us with those teachers already being comfortable with that technology to just very easily and smoothly transition into the online learning world that we were thrust into. That being said, one of the major, light bulb moments for us in Cobb was looking at the next SPLOST and how we go down the road for devices. Because as many of us quickly realized, there are a lot of students that did not have a device at home in order to take advantage of online learning. So we actually distributed 40,000 devices to families that needed a device. So that being said, looking down the path of what has caused us to have that light bulb moment, if you will, is looking more toward a one-to-one scenario. One-to-one is not something that's new by any stretch of the imagination. However, you haven't heard a lot about, this district is doing one-to-one and this district is looking to do one-to-one. But what has happened is the light bulb moment has said, okay, there's a lot of students that, number one, don't have a device at home when they needed it. Number two, there is that place for virtual learning. But finally, and probably very pivotal in this discussion, is the cost of that device. So now that you can get down to a very reasonably priced device for a student to have in their hands, and whether or not they have it at school or they take it home, that's getting down into the weeds of it. But to be able to have that device per student is becoming more and more important, and almost a no-brainer in a way, because we're all faced now with looking at what is end of course tests and milestones. How is that going to be? Because that's a requirement to be 100% online. So now that you have 40,000 devices, in our case, distributed to students, and only the devices that are desktops left in schools, that's going to be a significant challenge, a challenge that we will address, mind you, but that's also caused us to say, okay, the one-to-one now that it's more affordable, with a SPLOST kind of funding, That is one thing that we're looking to change and change very quickly moving down the road, because again, we have to be in that position where we, number one, can fund it, but number two, understand that is a recurring cost. This is not something you can go buy a device for 113,000 students and forget about it. So there has to be a lot of planning and management put into this. And again, that's going to be part of that presentation that I mentioned about what virtual is going to look like in Cobb County moving forward. But I think that's the one light bulb moment for us, is going down that one-to-one path. And again, many have already said, you know, we had to do things quickly. We had to find money to do things quickly, and greatly appreciative of all of the CARES Act funding that has come from all levels of government, because it has tremendously benefited public education to help us get through what would otherwise been an insurmountable task to overcome. So greatly appreciated of all of the assistance that the government at all levels have witnessed and have acknowledged that public education needed to be assisted.
Now the question goes to Superintendent Watson Harris, DeKalb County.
Thank you so much. And like my colleagues, we were doing some incredible things in the world of technology before this. Noteworthy, our Digital Dreamers program, as well as our Flex Academies. So if there was any silver lining from this, it's the acceleration of those programs. And we're really very excited about where those will grow. But definitely a need for professional development in this space, as all of my colleagues really have outlined. For us, we've also looked at this as an equity issue. We've all been aware of the digital divide, but we've been speaking a lot in DeKalb County about the digital use divide. And so while we were successful in getting devices in the hands of every student, their ability to use them, the supports that they needed, as well as the overall professional development of our staff, we recognize that as a gap, and one that we've been aggressive in filling. But for us, I think the biggest thing is really looking at this not as a one size fits all. While we do have scholars who have thrived in this space, our regression analysis has shown us that there were communities that were more heavily impacted than others in DeKalb, most notably our English language learners and our refugee community. So making sure that as we think about increasing the use of technology, making sure that we really understand the nuances of language acquisition, as well as making our newcomer students feel emotionally supported, that we're looking at this as a full, well-rounded picture, and that it isn't just about virtual or in-person, but how do we ensure that we're supporting the entire child and what that means for each and every child in DeKalb County School District.
Now, Superintendent Wilbanks, Gwinnett County Schools on that question.
Maureen, as we have heard from the others, digital learning is a good option, and I think it's a very good option for about 30% of the students. I think it's an okay option for the other 30%, but there's about 30% that I don't think do well with digital learning, and I'm speaking perhaps for the student body in Gwinnett, specifically here on that. Certainly, there's no replacement for in-person education and student-teacher interactions. Digital learning, I think, has been required and essential during this pandemic. It's something that's kept students involved in their work. But I think if we really look through some assessments, where our students at the end of this school year, we're going to see that some of them probably have not progressed. I think State of Ohio did a study that said maybe their students at the end of the school year will be about 70% of where they would have been had things been normal. I rather think that's far-reaching and applies to us as well as the State of Ohio. We have really been concerned with that, so we're trying to do some things this summer to do our very best to bridge that gap between this year and the start of next school year. We're doing a summer school unlike we've ever done before. And again, it's focused on getting those students engaged that haven't been engaged. Digital requires generally work from the home as well to encourage the students to participate. And I think those are the kind of things that we know vary from communities to communities. And as we really are thinking about how effective is digital learning, I think it's very effective, again, for a large number of students. For another group, it's okay. But for about 30% or maybe a little more than that, it is not a very good option long term.
Now the question goes to Dr. Beasley, Clayton County Schools.
Thank you, Maureen. I agree with my colleagues. I will just say, I think that the virtual learning experience is one model for instruction, but as in any model, you have to tweak different variables to improve the outcome. So I think we've got to look at the access, of course, the tools that students are using, the teacher quality, teacher training is a piece that we've got to improve. I think that the supervision of the student is critical, the engagement of the student, the involvement of the parent. I think student differences are very important to consider as well, dispositions and possibly their experiences and the age of the student may come into play, and family differences also, I believe, come into play as well. But I think as these variables are studied, as they are addressed, and as we get better at deciding who virtual learning works for and who it doesn't necessarily work for, I think that the data will improve, the research will improve. I don't think face-to-face works for everyone, so it wouldn't be very intelligent of us to assume that virtual learning is going to work for everyone. I think, again, it's one model among many, among others, that we've got to study. We've got to collect data, but we've also got to address the variables that improve the model or the outcomes within the model. So I think that here in Clayton County, we're committed to that. We don't want to assume that it's a model that doesn't work for all kids, nor should we assume that face-to-face is the model that every kid should have, because it works for one group of students. And so we're committed to doing what's best for the child and providing the child the supports that they need in order to be successful, regardless of the model for instruction. Thank you.
Thank you. And for our final superintendent on that question, Dr. Davis, Henry County.
Well, thanks, Maureen. And, I actually have great confidence and optimism in the quality and effectiveness of virtual learning. I don't think it is for every family and for every child, but I do believe families who have opted to continue in the virtual environment should have confidence that it will be a quality and comparable education. And what I really actually see as a distinguishing factor is how that virtual environment is constructed. If the virtual environment is constructed and dependent on the role of a teacher and not the role of a computer-based adapted curriculum, then you are going to have relationships that teacher is capable of forming through that digital forum. And I really don't think that virtual education happens in a vacuum. So the role of the school counselor and the role of the special education services and the role of gifted services and the role of professionals in social work and in our food nutrition service delivery, those are all aspects now that we know we can do in a virtual environment. And so I do believe that we've created a new standard for what effective instruction and effective learning and effective services can look like for families whose context or whose preference becomes a virtual environment. So I sit here today really confident that families who opt to continue in a virtual environment can expect quality, and they really can expect their child to have exceptional outcomes.
Thank you. We have about 30 30 minutes left with our time this morning with you all. So I'm moving to individual questions for each superintendent. I'm asking you to try to keep your answers to these questions to about a minute so we can have some final thoughts afterward. And the first superintendent in my lineup here for the individual question is Dr. Looney. And the question is, what is your message to your teachers who feel that COVID, and this is actually teachers across Georgia, revealed a lack of concern for teacher welfare? From my daily, again, emails and Facebook messages, I get a sense that teachers in metro area feel they were underappreciated and overlooked in many of the COVID-related discussions. Dr. Looney, how do you respond in a minute to your teachers?
Well, I think it exposes the vulnerabilities that we all feel during a COVID environment. And in our district, putting students first is our priority. And that's not to say that our employees are less important, but trying to find the balance between serving students, we know that they have to be served, and doing it in a safe and practical way is difficult. And so, I hear that concern. I empathize with it. The decision to have school or not have school, have face-to-face school or stay remote, is a difficult decision, and has to be contextualized in every specific community. And so I hope that those fears and those concerns that teachers aren't appreciated or valued prove to be wrong feelings or misperceptions in the long run. This has been a difficult journey for all of us, and we all are grieving and experiencing fear and pain and anxiety.
The next superintendent with individual questions, Superintendent Ragsdale of Cobb. I have talked to both educators and parents in your district who feel that it did not work, that teachers were both in person and remote, teaching at the same time. You addressed that earlier, but I want to ask you, are you emphatically saying that we will not see teachers in Cobb County both in person and remote simultaneously in their classrooms in the fall?
So I don't think that any of us can say emphatically and definitively anything for next school year right now. But what I will say is that was the single top priority in designing what virtual learning would look like in Cobb next year. Now, during Read Across America Week, I read to students at Kemp Elementary. And I myself had to get used to very quickly, okay, we had a kindergarten class I was reading to, there were some virtual learners. So as you read to a class, you're used to reading, showing the picture, reading the next page. Well, you had to read, show the picture to the remote students as well. So there is no disputing that teachers had a much more difficult job in every school district across the nation during this pandemic. Again, I'll go back to, CTLS allowed us in Cobb to really benefit our students. And there's two sides to that coin, right? When you're saying a benefit to students, to your point, Maureen, teachers were feeling like they were doing two jobs. And I understand that. And it was something that we made the decision that's how we were going to handle virtual. And originally, that's what drove us to that decision, was the fact of how we were going to have to quarantine both students and teachers. We were benefited by the Family Medical Leave Act expansions to where teachers would not have to utilize their sick days. And we even expanded that more in Cobb to try to ensure that our teachers were protected at every turn that we could take care of them in. That being said, I understand, just like Mike said in Fulton, we empathize with that. And it was a very difficult balance of trying to do what our job is, which is to educate students, as well as keep all of our team members safe and not overload them. So we understand that. We know that there were things that we needed to learn from, and I think that we have learned those lessons. And again, moving into next school year, yes, there's going to be a virtual option. I can't say emphatically anything again for next school year, but that was the primary drive in our design process for what virtual would look like next year, is that we would not have a teacher concurrently, and I think you used the term simultaneously, and I think that's the term that I'll focus on, is that we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that does not happen, that a teacher is going to have one group of students, whether they're virtual, whether they're remote, or as you go up in grade levels, high school, for example, you may have this period that's virtual and this period that's remote, because when you get into those specialized classes, such as AP chemistry, there are not a vast supply of AP chemistry teachers. So being able to say this person is going to teach AP chemistry online and this person is going to teach AP chemistry face-to-face, that's going to be a very difficult situation. And we don't want to do anything that's going to limit the opportunities that our students have, whether they're face-to-face or whether they're virtual. So that's going to be a fine balance that we move toward next year. But it's one, again, that the main driving force in our design process was to eliminate that simultaneous or concurrent face-to-face and virtual teachers, virtual students for our teachers.
Thank you. The next superintendent, Superintendent Watson Harris of DeKalb. Thousands of students returned to your school buildings yesterday, nearly a year after the pandemic started. What kind of feedback did you get? And do you feel in DeKalb this is a move to healing? Because returning to school was quite divisive, and your parents were quite outspoken about it on both sides.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. And yes, DeKalb is so beautifully diverse in so many ways. And with that comes a diversity of thought and position on this whole discussion of return to face-to-face. Yes, I do hope that this is a path to healing for the entire community. We have tried to focus on equity, excellence, and empathy in the way that we have approached our return to face-to-face instruction. And I have respected the position of every parent when we had parents that were advocating for a return to face-to-face option, as well as parents, teachers, and other stakeholders who were resistant to the idea. But that is why I'm so incredibly proud of our community, that we took a position that we would follow the guidance from the CDC, that we would continue to be boots on the ground, making sure that our schools were ready to keep our students and our staff safe before we welcome them back into the building. And as you mentioned, yesterday was a glorious day. Students were happy, the staff was happy, parents were happy, and we remain committed to providing a high quality remote experience for the families that want that. But we were very happy with how yesterday turned out. And it was time, we were ready, almost a year to the day when we had to close the doors. So again, I do hope, and I like the way that you phrase that, a path to healing, that we recognize that we're better together. And just as we got through this as a beautifully diverse community, we've learned a lot of lessons, and we will continue to make our decisions as one DeKalb. So thank you so much for that question.
Now we move to Superintendent Wilbanks. A quarter of Gwinnett students are from immigrant families, and they've faced additional barriers in this pandemic, language and socioeconomic. They may not have had reliable internet. Did first or second generation immigrant students face greater obstacles than their peers? And if so, how did and how will Gwinnett County respond?
First of all, Maureen, I think your question can be answered by yes. But what did we do to help that situation? I think we have ensured that every home that has a student has internet connections. We work with our community along with some of the other CARES dollars that we had to make sure that the some 25,000 homes that did not have internet connection has that. And I don't believe there would be a single home in Gwinnett County Public School Service area that does not have internet service at this time. The big challenge is obviously using it and getting students to sign on. We also provided devices. We have about 80,000 what's referred to as Chromebooks that we check out to students, and those that really signed on and participated in their instructions, I think that provided them that means, and we are working to get all our students to sign on. I don't know numbers, but I do know a number of our schools in those areas you referred to. Counselors, social workers, assistant principals, principals have really reached out to those families to try to get them to either get back in school or to participate in the online learning now that they have the ability to do that.
Thank you. And now we move to Dr. Beasley of Clayton. I've been listening to your videos. Many of them are inspiring. You recently told older students in Clayton to sort of, quote, be patient, continue to work virtually, and we'll let you know when your schedule will change or when you will transition back to face-to-face. Older students have lost a lot, particularly high school seniors. They have lost rituals and benchmarks and hallmarks. What do you say to those students?
Well, I'll tell you that we do acknowledge that they've lost a lot. We are working on a face-to-face graduation, so they should expect that to occur in Clayton County. And our principals, high school principals in particular, are working to ensure that they have senior celebratory events. And so they should expect more of those. What they look like, of course, they've got to adhere to social distancing and possibly meet some other requirements. But we are supporting the principals as they work with their students and parents to design and implement those events. Our goal is to, while we can't recover everything that was lost because of the pandemic, our goal is to at least celebrate, recover what we can recover, and to provide them an opportunity to transition to the next phase of their lives, knowing that we appreciated them and that we're very proud of them, given the circumstances as they are. But I want to say, Maureen, it's important to acknowledge that we have other levels that are also desiring or desirous of some transition type events that our principals and parents are working together to develop and to implement that we will support. Honestly, those events will look very different from school to school, and we're good with that. As long as the parents and the principals and the students are okay with those events, that they're safe, we're going to support those events. The more we can do as time progresses, we will do more. But I just want to say to our seniors and students in particular at the high school level who value those senior week events and homecoming events, et cetera, that they're on our minds. Principals are working with their teams and families and parents to design and to implement those events, and we're going to do our best to celebrate them in grand style during our graduation face-to-face events that will be held in our stadiums here in Clayton County.
Now we move to Dr. Davis of Henry County. I have spent a couple hours this week reading your Facebook community pages, and I want to ask you how you negotiated the range of opinions. For example, just this week alone, I saw these two parent opinions. Schools should have opened in August versus schools should not be open in Henry County. Virtual learning keeps all of us safe. How did you straddle that range of opinion?
Well, that has been what the superintendent responsibility across this country has been called upon to do. It has required us to navigate very personal perspectives on the role schools should play in community life. And I do believe in an effort to be present, to be in conversation, to be in dialogue with families, as they navigate their personal perspective. We've given families an option, and we believe that families having an option has elevated really their comfort with their child's learning experience this year. But what I'll also say is that I think that there's just an acknowledgement there's been a very dynamic season, and in being so dynamic, it's been really hard to predict one phase, one season to the next within the entire year. And I think a level of honesty, which we've all aimed to accomplish, has been our best bet. We make the best decisions we can with the information we have at hand, and we are really connected closely to our community perspectives in doing that. And then the last thing I'll just say is that health and wellness in Henry County, we've not been able to operate unilaterally. This is a community commitment. And the partners that have been really amplified in our hospital executives, our pediatricians, our family practitioners, along with our Department of Public Health, has really demonstrated that every agency playing their own role surrounds the education system, and that we aren't doing any of these bodies of work alone. We're doing them under counsel and advisement, and with a conscientious awareness that there are experts in the space that really have to inform how we make decisions in a timely way. And so, I'm proud that we've been open since September 28th, and I believe that our families have really seen our schools as a safe learning environment, and that the data shows that it is safer to be in a Henry County classroom, in a Henry County school, than any other public place related to COVID exposure. And we're pleased that we were able to offer athletics to our students who engaged in athletic programs and extracurricular programs. And we know that that's a part of connecting kids into a hope and into their future. And so, I just really think it's been a season of navigating a lot of personal perspectives and trying to be present for those who want to inform the decisions that we're making.
Thank you. Now for the question for Dr. Herring of APS. You had a unique experience this week in that the governor took a jab at APS for failing to initiate teacher vaccines. He complained the Atlanta School Board sent him a letter last month urging teacher vaccines, and he said that he called that pandemic politics at its best. And now they're going to wait 2 or 3 weeks to vaccinate their teachers. I think they're doing a disservice to their teachers. Are you doing a disservice to your teachers, or is the governor guilty of pandemic politics here?
Let me appreciate your question, Maureen, and let me respond as I have publicly. The governor's position and statements, I believe, were unfortunate as it relates to the preparedness of Atlanta Public Schools. To be clear, we have not done any disservice to our teachers. If anything, we have planned as strategically as we possibly could to ensure that our teachers would be vaccinated. And for clarity, teachers can be vaccinated just as all educators can, starting March 8th. In Atlanta Public Schools, we were very fortunate to, as many of our partners or my colleagues have across the metro area, to partner with Fulton County Board of Health. In doing so, we planned for mass vaccination. The 10 days leading up to that and the many, many months prior to that, we've been planning. Outside of our planning and preparation, we've been very intentional around the work that we've done to ensure that while inside of our buildings, our teachers and staff and our students would be safe. Very specifically, though, in reference to our preparedness, I will continue to emphasize, not a decision that we've rendered has been tied to disservicing our teachers. If anything, it's quite the contrary. We know that we cannot do this work without them. Relative to our governor's position, I respect that everyone is open to their point of opinion, but I also want to be clear about pandemic politics. And I will say this on behalf of the Atlanta Public Schools system at large. We believe that the lives of our children and our faculty and staff and our community at large is not meant for us to play politics at all. If anything, it is for us to be clear and thoughtful and very inclusive around how we make decisions in a space that has not historically been our wheelhouse. And that has been a space in which health experts have had to help guide us. And we have not only partnered with those experts, but we continue to utilize their expertise. And in this final case, relative to the availability of vaccination or vaccines, if we had those vaccines available at any time earlier, we would also have been prepared to deploy our ability to vaccinate our teachers. We will, in partnership with the Fulton County Board of Health and at the Mercedes-Benz mass location site, be prepared, and we'll vaccinate our staff. And one more time, because I think intentional redundancy matters at certain times, and this is one. Atlanta Public Schools is proud of the work we've done for our faculty and staff and teachers, and never has our focus been tied to disservice. So we appreciate the comment, but we're very clear around what our work and focus has been.
I want to thank all the superintendents, and now I want to give them 30 seconds because we're really almost out of time, starting with Dr. Herring of APS, to tell us one lesson they've learned. They had to learn in real time how to educate kids in a deadly pandemic. Please tell us one lesson you learned and keep it to 30 seconds. Dr. Herring, the floor is yours.
I have learned the power of human strength in both our educators, our families, and all of us during a pandemic. I have learned that we could not do any of this work and make any decisions in isolation, that it took all of us to be able to utilize our best efforts, our expertise, and our care for human beings to be able to protect one another. And I believe that if we continue to do that, we will be better because of that.
Thank you. Dr. Beasley next. 30 seconds, please. One lesson.
One lesson is, I don't care what you plan for in January, just expect March to be a whole lot different than what you planned for. So I'm going to keep that in mind as I plan for August in March. Thank you.
Dr. Davis, Henry County, one lesson, 30 seconds, please.
Public education's been known as a bureaucratic, somewhat immovable institution. And I believe we've demonstrated that we've turned on a dime, we've reinvented and reinvented. And so I think what we're taking away is that public education is staffed by professionals in every single job family who do their job because they care about kids, they care about their well-being, they care about their academic experience, and they care about coming together as a community, even in the darkest and hardest of times. And we've learned to be better as a team through all of this.
Dr. Looney, Fulton, one lesson, please, in 30 seconds.
Thank you. I've learned how important it is to have relationships across our school community. I've learned that our teachers are amazingly resilient and the power of grace and patience.
Superintendent Ragsdale, one lesson you've learned in 30 seconds.
Not so much a lesson, but just a reaffirming of how great teachers are, especially our teachers. I brag on them all the time, and they have just gone above and beyond. And I hope the lesson learned for everybody else that's not a teacher is how difficult it is to be a teacher, let alone a teacher in the middle of a pandemic. And secondly, I think that we all can learn a lesson from just being kind. Your message or your question for Dr. Davis a while ago about the extreme ends of what we've had to deal with. Kindness always goes a long way when you're dealing with either side of an issue.
Thank you. Superintendent Watson Harris, DeKalb County, your lesson in 30 seconds.
That it's quite a challenge to become a superintendent in a new city during a pandemic. But I will say that I just want to thank DeKalb County School District. I want to thank everyone for the challenges that we struggled with together, and I'm proud of where we are today. And I know that we're just moving onward and upward from here.
And we're going to give the last word to, I think, the person we can safely call the dean of superintendents of schools in Georgia, and one who shocked me recently with his retirement plan, because I thought I'd retire long before J. Alvin Wilbanks. But go ahead, sir.
Maureen, first of all, I'm not old enough, but in any case, our teachers and staff have been outstanding. I knew they were, but during this pandemic, I think they have really risen to the occasion. And their commitment to students is certainly unparalleled. And we all know that student engagement is key to their learning.
With that, we are closing our panel with the 7 Metro Atlanta superintendents. We appreciate them giving us their morning, and we appreciate you tuning in. Please don't go anywhere, because right now the AJC education reporters and our editor Kevin Riley are coming back to talk about what we heard here. So again, please stay here, and thanks to our readers who helped us shape the questions that we asked our superintendents today. Stay here.
Thank you for joining us for this community conversation with our Metro Atlanta school superintendents. We appreciate their time and candor in discussing these important topics. So thank you again to the superintendents for finding the time to do this. Exploring the challenges of making in-person schooling safe for students, teachers, and school personnel is among the most urgent issues in our community right now. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution is committed to providing you with the information you need to make informed choices. And we want to hear from you. If you have questions, please leave those in the comments section of the streaming platform that you're watching. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Now let's talk a little bit about what's next for schools. Joining me are a number of our journalists that I'll introduce now, beginning with our AJC education columnist, Maureen Downey, who I hope has caught her breath after that leading that challenging discussion. Gwinnett education reporter, Aliyah Malik, good to see you. Our Atlanta Public Schools and Fulton County education reporter, Vanessa McCray, Vanessa, good to see you. Our DeKalb and Cobb County education reporter, Crystal Dixon. Crystal, hi. Our City of Atlanta reporter, Wilborn Nobles, has also joined us. Wilborn, good to see you. Our state education reporter, Ty Tagami, is here. Ty. And our Southside reporter, Leon Stafford. Hi, Leon. Good to see you. These are the journalists who are working hard on your behalf covering schools. Now that we've heard from school leaders, let's talk a little bit about what they had to say. So I'm going to start with you, Maureen. If you're not exhausted after trying to corral that group the way that you did, after hearing all of that, what would you say are the big urgent questions that are still out there for schools?
I think there are three main questions remaining, and one is what August will look like, whether or not we will have COVID at bay, and whether or not the variants will be under control. I think that's a big unknown. I think the second is the fallout, how teachers feel as if they were treated this year. I think we'll have to see whether retention and recruitment is affected. I think many teachers have called this the most bruising and challenging year of their careers, and I think as the economy improves, we'll have to see if they decide to stay in teaching. And I also think one big question is virtual learning, I think, is here to stay, but can we make it better? And I think that the superintendents themselves said they are seeing some problems with virtual learning, but they believe it can be improved. And I think that's a big challenge ahead.
Thanks, Maureen. Aliyah, let's talk about Gwinnett County a little bit. What do you think is, the outstanding questions are for that massive school district?
Thank you. Yeah, Gwinnett is the largest school district in Georgia. It's a tenth of Georgia's school children are in Gwinnett County. So piggybacking off of what Maureen said, they have Gwinnett, Mr. Wilbanks said that he does intend to continue virtual learning next year, although he expressed a lot of reservations about how well it works for a large number of students. I'm really interested in the logistics of how that'll work. With so many adults being vaccinated, I wonder whether so many kids will go back to school that social distancing is basically a joke. I wonder whether they will be able, conversely, if a lot of students decide to stay virtual, I wonder if they'll be able to keep their virtual options going strong and maybe expand Gwinnett Online Campus for the number of students who will choose to remain virtual. I also wonder if virtual is here to stay for years and years and years, if the demand for virtual will drop off as more adults and maybe even eventually children start to get vaccinated. And if virtual education is really a long-term option for lots of students, how will the school districts handle the social component to students learning? I mean, so many students learn to socialize with their peers and kind of be a person in the world in school. And so with virtual education, how can schools continue to ensure that kind of development?
Thank you. I'm going to go next to Wilborn Nobles, who covered DeKalb schools, but we recently asked him to move over to Atlanta City Hall, but we didn't let him get out of joining us for this conversation, Wilborn. So you spent a lot of time when you were in DeKalb talking to teachers who were very public, I think, about and effusive about their concerns. And of course, Maureen asked superintendent about that activism in the district. What else do you think our readers need to know about teachers and the voice that they found in all of this?
Yeah, well said, Kevin, and thank you for having me. You know, some DeKalb teachers voiced concerns about teaching in person during this pandemic because a major COVID-19 outbreak hinders efforts to help students become the best version of themselves mentally, emotionally, and physically. Now, with teachers back in classrooms, many of them still want the district to do more to safeguard buildings, to ensure that school technology works. And now they want clarity on when the district plans to provide that one-time $1,000 bonus mentioned by the governor and the state school superintendent. And of course, the CAP superintendent mentioned today that COVID fears exist on every level in the district, but the public still lacks knowledge of the exact number of DeKalb teachers in opposition to reopening, as well as the full number of teacher resignations due to COVID-19 concerns. So with all that said, it remains to be seen at next Monday's DeKalb School Board meeting if officials will provide more information on teacher resignations, district progress in addressing building issues, vaccinations, or clarity on when DeKalb school staff will receive that statewide bonus.
Thanks, Wilborn. I'd like to kind of build on that question with you, Crystal Dixon, who you cover Cobb County schools. Superintendent Ragsdale said he really wants to eliminate the need for educators to simultaneously have to teach in-person and remote students when the next school year begins. How will the district accomplish that? I mean, what challenges does it have if that is in fact his priority?
Yes, thanks for having me tonight. Yeah, it's going to be really challenging. The district will have to look at its budget to make sure it has enough funds to possibly hire new teachers if that is part of the plan, to make sure teachers don't have to teach both in-person and virtual students. They also have to consider whether or not, if certain classes, like Mr. Ragsdale said earlier today, if certain classes have enough teachers to go around. I think he mentioned AP chemistry. There are not a lot of AP chemistry teachers who are out there. So the district will have to consider whether or not they have enough teachers to provide both just teachers who are just in-person educators and remote educators. They'll also have to make sure that the quality of education they provide online matches that of the education they provide in person. There are some parents who probably may feel like the virtual learning platform may not be up to par with the in-person learning. So the district may have, to face that challenge. And there also, could be a space issue. Some districts in Cobb where they have 80% of the students who've returned in person. So that probably means that most of the classrooms are filled. So there comes there's also a component where the district may have to sort of figure out whether or not, if they're able to hire more teachers, will they have the space to provide those teachers with a classroom who just teach in person or just remote learning. So there are a lot of different factors that school district and the school board will have to figure out in the next few months.
Thanks, Crystal. Ty Takami, I wanted to come to you next. As our state education reporter, you've been to a lot of places throughout this pandemic and written a lot about teacher vaccinations. I mean, and the struggles and the opinions. Did you hear anything today that gives more insight to what's going on with teacher vaccinations?
Sorry, I think you'd think I'd have that worked out by now. I didn't hear specific. What I did hear specifics from 4 of the 7 superintendents who were explicitly saying they were going to lead by example and get vaccinated themselves. They all were encouraging teachers to get vaccinated. I think that's the key here. The research has been pretty clear that adults, especially in elementary school, adults meaning the teachers and other staff, are the biggest threats for spreading the virus. So we need to get them vaccinated. Now, there's going to be one big unknown here, and that's accepting school districts that are handling the vaccinations in-house and they can sort of keep track of which teachers are and aren't getting vaccinated. We're going to have a hard time knowing just whether we've reached herd immunity within schools, because teachers can go out privately. They can go to the mass vaccination centers that the state's running. And actually I've taught some who've done that. So the school district, those are private medical records the school districts won't necessarily know. But I did hear some encouraging news, not from a superintendent that I texted with today. And she had said previously the surveys had indicated like half her teachers wanted to get vaccinated, but actually they started this week and 67%, 2 out of 3 already had, and another 13% wanted to. So that's astronomically higher than the surveys would have led us to believe. So but the vaccination is key. You heard several superintendents say that.
Ty, I want to follow up with one thing that got my attention. Maureen asked them a very direct question about will they require students and teachers to be vaccinated. And some were clear, some were, I'm not sure if they really answered. And at least one referred to the idea that the state could make that a requirement. Do you think that's the sort of thing that will happen, or where do you think that debate will go?
I think the jury's out on that. The jury hasn't even been convened on that. That's a long way out. We're operating under an emergency use authorization and will be for who knows how long. You can't have any mandate in that situation. And we did hear, the majority of them said it should be a personal opinion, right? But I think we heard a couple say that we need to have that conversation about a mandate at some point. So we do mandate certain vaccines in schools, the measles, mumps, rubella, for instance. But I think there's still a lot of science is going to have to be done around the vaccines and the virus before something like that happens. And it'll happen through the department. I think Chris Ragsdale said that's a state decision. He's right. It's the Department of Public Health that will ultimately have to reach a decision on that, maybe with input from superintendents.
Thanks, Ty. So Leon Stafford, Clayton Superintendent Beasley said that it's really difficult for the superintendents to plan for a return to the classroom because of how things change so fast. What are you hearing from parents? I'm sure that's not super comforting for them.
No, and parents have, kind of been somewhat sidelined when you think about how the information is coming to them. So they're being told like there are definite, they want to make sure that the children are safe. And so they put in guidelines as to when they can bring the kids in. The guidelines sometimes were changing. And because of that, parents were sitting back, it was unknown to them where things were standing and how schools were open. So they basically were somewhat frustrated. And many parents that I talked to said that the biggest problem they had was not knowing exactly if things would change from week to week. And that's a tough thing to be. That's a tough situation to be in. For Clayton, the superintendent tried to stay consistent, but a lot of the parents that I talked to saw school systems around Metro Atlanta being a little less consistent, and that brought a lot of fears to them. They never knew if, okay, is next week the week in which we're going to be called back? Will we have all the right circumstances, and will I be able to object to whether or not I want to bring my kids back? That was the frustration I heard from so many people.
Thanks, Leon. Vanessa McCrae, look, the stimulus bill is apparently on its way to the president's desk. I haven't checked exactly where the voting is yet, but and that means a bunch of money is coming the way of schools. So how would a district like Atlanta Public Schools, which you cover, use that money? I mean, what are the most urgent needs, or where do you think that money will go for them?
So we know a little bit from what has happened with the 2 prior stimulus bills, which injected APS with an infusion of more than $100 million in cash. And so we can tell a little bit from how they've been talking about how they're going to prioritize that money, what their needs will be in the future. And I think the one that is most pertinent, or among the most pertinent for parents, is the focus on trying to offer remediation and academic support for students who might not have learned as much or might have encountered difficulties keeping up with online classes or participation. So in Atlanta, they're talking about using CARES Act money to help fund a very robust summer school program that will be 5 days a week for 4 weeks. In Fulton County, they're going to use CARES Act dollars to help incentivize teachers to agree to teach summer school, because the Fulton County School District is aware that teachers have a lot of fatigue after this year, and that it might take a little bit more of a financial incentive for them to come back into the classroom on their summer break. So I think that those will be main areas that that districts will look to, as well as, you know, PPE, computer devices, replenishing library books, and all of those other things that we saw happening throughout the fall. And it's an important issue, and one that the education team at the AJC will be trying to watchdog for readers.
Thanks, Vanessa. So one more, we're about to go to questions from our audience, but I've got one more I want to throw at you, Ty Tagami. Would you say that what the superintendents had to say today addressed, we've heard so much about parental fear and teacher fear. Would you say that parents and teachers watching probably feel better? Yes or no?
That depends. So much about this pandemic has been about personal risk calculation, and everybody has a different situation. They have different illnesses at home, and they have just the different sensibilities. And so the game's going to change with vaccines, and so people are going to have to make a different calculation. I think that we are probably going to see more kids showing up in person. That's going to make it even more difficult to social distance. Remember, kids will not be vaccinated in the fall. So it's still going to be an open question. And I think you heard a lot of the superintendents saying, and Maurice Beasley, I think, put it pretty succinctly when he said, you know, it's hard to plan in January or whatever, August for March, and now he's trying to plan in, remember that, planning in August while it is March, planning for August. I messed that up. But anyway, it's really hard to figure out what's going to happen 3 months, next month, let alone what, August is like half a year away. So who knows?
Thanks, Ty. All right, we're going to take some questions that our audience has submitted, and Leroy Chapman is going to read those questions. And Leroy, go ahead and direct them to the person you think is best suited to answer them, and we'll try to at least get through a few of these questions.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. So I've been monitoring social media, and the first question, and it comes from a couple of folks, is really about the issue of social distancing and whether or not there could be any protocols put in place that could limit the number of kids in classrooms. So the question is, are there plans to be able to actually do this? So I'm hearing some skepticism. So I'll come back to you, Ty. I know you're ready to, you've been looking at districts across the state. So are there methods to be able to do this?
Yeah, hi, Leroy. There are. I don't know if school districts, there's a lot of debate around whether those methods are a good idea. You could just talk to Grant Rivera over in Marietta, the superintendent there, who started out, when his kids returned, they returned in what's called a hybrid fashion, meaning part-time basically. And you do that so you have fewer kids in the building in any given moment, right? Half the kids, hopefully, or fewer than half. And that allows for social distancing. The way classrooms are designed now with the populations, there's no way to do it if you have anywhere near regular capacity. And his argument was, and you heard it today, I think one of the superintendents said that the schools are the safest place to be. And the spread is lower within the infection rate, the spread of infections is lower within schools than outside in the broader community. And I suppose that is the case, unless you're someone who is at home all the time ordering groceries online, et cetera, then that's probably going to be a safer spot. But I would think that we've gradually seen more parents sending their kids back to school as the months have wore on. And I would think that we're going to see more of that in the fall. And that's why they all said they're maintaining and hopefully improving their online offerings. Although that may not, we're only talking to a handful of districts around Metro Atlanta, and this is a big state. And I don't know if all the rural districts will have the capacity to do that, given the lack of broadband in a lot of places. But so the short answer is it's going to be very difficult to social distance in the fall.
Okay, thank you, Ty. stand by because I have another one. I think you probably are the person who's best equipped to begin answering this question. So we have this question from a reader. And this reader asks, will the academic performance of children be evaluated differently from now on, considering how disruptive this COVID year has been?
The sense I get is that that's a complicated question because the way we have been evaluating them ever since No Child Left Behind Act in like 2001 has been through the standardized tests, the Georgia milestones, and those have become increasingly unpopular. And actually the state before the pandemic had embarked on a mission to come up with a new way of testing kids, and that was disrupted by, over the past year. But I suspect they're going to get back to that. I think that yes, we will continue monitoring children in different ways, maybe with shorter tests given throughout the school year instead of just a big one at the end of the year. But the CARES money, it would be difficult to minimize how much money is going to be coming to Georgia through the CARES Act for the schools. It's billions, and 20% of it has to be set aside for what they call remediation. And I'm sure probably more will in Georgia. So there will be all sorts of testing and analysis. And like Vanessa was saying, summer school or longer school days or weekend school. There's going to be all sorts. There's going to be plenty of money of that and plenty of money for that, and it's going to be going on for a while.
Okay, thanks, Ty. We'll take one more, and I'll come to you first, Alea, with this one. Since you're in Gwinnett and it's the largest district, this one's about innovation. So the question is, are there things that we're learning now that can help us really innovate and rethink education down the road? So anything that this is teaching us that we can apply to school education down the road now that we've had to adapt to pandemic conditions?
Yeah, thanks. I think the answer to that, from what I've heard, lies largely in the virtual learning that the school districts have been giving. Pretty much all the superintendents said we weren't prepared to teach everyone virtually a year ago today when all the schools started shutting down. And then over the past year, we figured out what works. I think that in some cases, it was as simple as the teachers learning to use like certain technology and certain apps well enough to give lessons that way. But I think they also learned how best to engage with their students to keep the virtual students engaged and not just kind of off of the ether with the teachers not knowing what they're doing. And I think in the future, I think a lot of different superintendents have said they are now prepared to integrate more technology into the classroom, even when everyone comes back. I've been joking that there's no such thing as a bad weather day anymore unless people start losing power because, if there's a nice storm and unless you start losing power, you're just going to be learning from your computer, like be prepared. So I think a lot of that, I think the school districts have just gotten better with virtual learning. And even in a scenario where almost all the kids in the school district go back to school in person, there will be better use of technology in the classroom.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that's it from our audience. So back to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Leroy. And I wanted to thank our panel, our journalists. It's good to see all of you. Of course, I'm sure our audience will recognize we haven't all been together in our newsroom for a long, long time. And it's good to see all of you. And I also would like to really thank our subscribers. Your subscription really is how we can support our work and allows our journalists to do their work. So thank you so much for subscribing. And if you're not a subscriber, I hope you will be. You can go to ajc.com/worthknowing and sign up today. Thank you. Continue to follow our reporting in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and at ajc.com.